Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Klatka. I am currently a clinical mental health counseling student at Lock Haven University. I'm going into, I guess this would be almost my third year of the program, and I'm going to be starting practicum and internship within the next couple of weeks and months. So very much looking forward to that.
And I am Kellie Pytel. I work full-time at Penn State University as an assistant research professor, but then I'm also a part-time teaching instructor at Lock Haven University. And we really focus a lot on wellness. Our program is primarily online, so that gives us a different perspective when we're looking at different roles that we have as counselors, students, supervisees, and what that means about wellness when you're in the virtual world. So we're really excited to be here with you guys, and we're excited that you're here with us.
All right, so today we have a few different learning objectives. One, we hope that you will be able to understand what wellness means, and specifically as it relates to the virtual world of counseling. We would also like to have you guys be able to discuss how a virtual world will create unique barriers for counselors, educators, and students who want to maintain self-care and wellness. And we hope that by the end of this, you will also be able to identify 4 new wellness and self-care strategies that have been adjusted to meet the needs of the ever-changing virtual world. I guess before we get started, we really just want to understand who our audience here as well. So are you an educator, a student, a practitioner, and do you have any experience with online counseling or telemental health? And feel free, please, to unmute yourself. You could talk that way or utilize the chat as well. Okay, so I see somebody saying Candace, providing telehealth services in ONA group practice. Okay. We have a student, Jackie, welcome. Educator, supervisor, and practitioner. Practitioner, clinical psychologist.
So a lot of variety and
yeah,
here with us this morning, which is really exciting. And we do hope that throughout, as we mentioned, I'm more on the counselor educator side of things. Nikki is more on the student side of things, but we'd love to hear your perspectives on, what you're doing and how you're overcoming a lot of the virtual things that we've been thrown into given COVID.
All right, so thank you guys for participating there. We want to keep that up. We just have 2 questions, I guess, just to kind of get it started with the discussion. So first, how do you practice self-care? What does that look like for you?
Maybe we are practicing self-care right now.
Again, please feel free to use a chat. All right. Setting boundaries, that's a great one.
We do see the limited self-care.
Yeah.
Meditation with YouTube and Headspace, those are great. Walks. Yeah, so we see here self-care is different for everyone. We've got walking, so we've got individuals who are focusing more on physical self-care, time with family and friends, more social interaction, being outside, nature, meditation, that could be emotional or cognitive. So a lot of different types of self-care that we're seeing here.
Mm-hmm. And again, that'll be important to kind of keep in mind as we move through this presentation, because we do want to emphasize that self-care is unique for each unique individual, and you should feel free to really modify it to each unique needs that you have. And I guess we've all kind of explained here too, it seems like a lot of you have maintained your physical and mental well-being during the pandemic. And I think somebody disclosed that they had very little self-care. Do you feel as though it's been more difficult to maintain physical and mental well-being, especially with COVID?
And if not difficult, has it changed? So one example that I always use is the gym was something that would be really beneficial for many to go and get all that energy out, engage in physical fitness, and gyms were closed, or there's very limited ability for individuals to go to the gym every day like they were used to. So that's something that when we're thinking of working with clients who are very, structured, they've got things working for them, and then all of a sudden they're gone, how have they changed? And so we are really interested in knowing, have things changed for you as a result of the pandemic? And I see winter has lingered, so it was way too cold outside and the health center was closed, right? So someone who wants to be fairly active is having a more difficult time. Lack of commute has played a role, walk down the hall, yeah. Well, great. Thank you guys for sharing. And as Nikki said earlier, what we really hope that you get from our presentation are different ideas. So thinking about not only your own self-care and wellness, but learning from the group, because maybe something isn't working for you right now, or you feel like self-care is limited. Perhaps what someone else shares gives you that opportunity to say, oh, okay, well, that would just take a couple of minutes and would be easy to implement.
All right, guys. So I think it's important first that we define what self-care actually is. And self-care is a very broad concept, as we have seen with all of the examples here today. And it is variably defined within the literature. And again, just emphasizing the fact that it is unique for each unique individual, and it can be modified to meet everyone's needs as well. But typically, definitions of self-care are going to refer to activities and processes that are managed by the individual, specifically for the purpose of supporting one's health, well-being, and also as a means of stress relief. Now, I kind of wanted to present a little bit of a different aspect of self-care for mental health professionals specifically, because within the clinical mental health counseling and also social work literature, self-care is first defined by breaking down the self and what the self actually is, and then how it functions. So you're going to be having two different components of self, and that is the professional self and then also the personal self. And the professional self is going to be an aspect of self that is going to engage in work relationships with clients that are guided by role expectations, and they will provide the rules of engagements with clients. And then the personal self is an aspect of self that will exist outside of the workplace, and it's guided by additional role expectations pertaining to family, economic functions, community, and then also other environments. And although these two aspects really function independently, they are going to be part of this larger singular entity, which again is the self. And ideally, it does function best when both of the components are functioning with balance, consistency, and integrity. So if we as mental health professionals are beginning to experience burnout and other issues with separating oneself from work, like telemental health can easily do, it is said that we are experiencing an imbalance between the two selves, so the professional self and the personal self again. And this could include experiencing an infringement with the personal self on the professional self on the personal self. And that would also be known as bringing your work home with you. So I think it's important to kind of keep in mind and also reflect on what happens when leaving work at the office has become blurred, like some of you have already mentioned. And that could be as a result of increasing usage of telemental health, online services, all of that stuff. So we should not only really look at self-care from a component look, but also from a multifaceted and flowing standpoint as well. And I think one way that we could do that is by really looking at the different self-care models and how self-care is actually integrated within wellness and wellness models then. So one of the first models that I really wanted to look at here was self-care and wellness, was the wheel of wellness. And this is because it was one of two wellness models that are empirically supported by the counseling literature specifically. And this wheel, the wheel of wellness, is comprised of items that were found to positively correlate with healthy living, quality of life, and also longevity. And all of the characteristics are then organized based on 3 major life tasks. So that's love, friendship, and work. And it has also self and spirit, with that being critical as well. And then the 7 items surrounding the 3 main life tasks are going to include education, business, media, government, community, family, and religion. And they are also thought to impact personal wellness. And I think what's important to really hone in on here is that there are 12 self-direction tasks that will include specifically self-care, emotional awareness, coping, stress management, and then work as self-management, and how that really all coincides to help meet work, love, and friendship needs. And now, whether we go off of the overarching definition of self-care as a whole, or even just the definition of self-care related to mental health professionals, both of these mention the importance of stress management, relationship management, community, exercise, etc. And they were all seen within this model of wellness. And if we just look at this model alone, I think it's pretty clear to see that self-care is overarching and it is an integral component in achieving optimal well-being. But despite this, I think it is important to kind of look at a different model of wellness just to really drive this point home, which is what I wanted to do with the next model that we'll be talking about, which is the indivisible self. So the indivisible self model is based off of Alfred Adler's ideas, and he proposed that holism is central to understanding human behavior. And by emphasizing the whole rather than each unique individual element, we're able to kind of gain a little bit more of a holistic perspective as to what wellness is actually comprised of. And additionally, within this model, there are 5 factors that are thought to comprise the self, which are including creative self, coping self, social self, essential self, and physical self. And without these in alignment, the indivisible whole self can be compromised. And additionally, this model can also be used as a way to help other people in considering their behaviors and choices to really increase their wellness in these various areas. And again, I just kind of want to specifically focus on certain areas here to really drive this point home about self-care. And if we really look at each of these 5 cells, we can see that self-care is an essential aspect in each of the factors of life. And again, just looking specifically at some of the main components, for the essential self, self-care is actually one of the 4 main components of the essential self. And without self-care and making this conscious effort to really live long and well, individuals can experience symptoms of hopelessness and despair, which can result in a loss of meaning and purpose in life. And I think as mental health professionals and also future mental health professionals, I think we more than anyone really understand how important it is to have these things in order to actually assist other people. So it kind of falls in line with that quote of "you can't pour from an empty cup." Additionally, we also have the coping self, and the coping self, although it doesn't specifically relate to self-care, it doesn't explicitly mention it, but the elements relating to our responses to life events are, which ultimately are going to provide a means of transcending negative implications of these events then. And I think moving forward here, I just want to kind of reflect on a question here that we'll keep in mind, but not really talk about it at this point in time. So if you want to just grab a piece of paper and write this down, or maybe take a note on your phone or something like that, or make a mental note of it, just think of 4 factors that you feel have most significantly impacted your life and wellness when working remotely and or learning remotely if you are a student here today. Again, just kind of keep this handy then moving forward.
So these are factors that we found in the literature to implement wellness in a virtual world. So if you see here, family, longer hours, tendency to overwork, inability to switch from work to home life, burnout, and then that physical space. Does anyone have anything different that they want to share than what's listed here? Any factors that you've identified? Screen breaks, oh, flexibility of location, time and energy saving. Nikki, are there any that you've identified that you want to share?
Asynchronous courses, that's a good one too.
Schedule becomes important if you're working and living in the same space. Yeah, getting at that physical space and inability to switch to home life. I always think of, like, I've had a lot of students and I've also had a lot of clients and supervisees where they've got their office in their bedroom. And so there's a lot of processing there about how do I separate when I work right beside where I sleep. And so they've noticed that their sleep has been impacted, their mental health has been impacted because it's this feeling of like, I can't get out of the workspace. I don't have the space to, walk out into the living room. I have a very small apartment. So what can I do to have more of a clear boundary when it comes to my personal life and my professional life? Thank you for sharing. A challenge is in replacing social gatherings. This was one of the coping strategies. Someone had to define a work study space and separate it from the living spaces. Yeah.
One of the ones too that I also found within the literature, and I've experienced myself, is kind of that loneliness feeling of you really don't have anybody in person. And I know a lot of you guys have mentioned that just being able to spend time with other people, taking walks with family members or friends. And you really don't get that with this full virtual world. And it could really take a toll on us, especially from where we came from with being able to free roam as opposed to where we are at this point in time.
Yeah, and that definitely makes me think of a lot of people shared earlier, liking to get outside, liking to be active.
Yes.
And, depending on where you're at, weather doesn't always allow for that. Or if you live in a city, perhaps that doesn't, if there were lockdowns there for a while. So all of these things, really considering how do we, like Nichelle, how do we define a better work, study, and space to really separate things? I see one other person shared about the challenge of continuing to work and then also taking care of children. And that's been a huge thing that I've seen for across counselor educators and students. How do I attend class with children running around in the background? Daycares are closed. My spouse is also working from home. Like, there's all of these adjustments that need to be made. Thanks everyone for sharing. That was great. So as we move on, we really want to focus on wellness in different roles. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we know now that you are coming from different places. We have students out there. We do have clinicians out there. So really think about, we're going to present you with a case. Think about the scenario, but then also think about how it relates to wellness so that we can, again, share different strategies that are going to be helpful for us, maybe not now. So if you're a student and you're getting ready, maybe in a couple of months or years to go to practicum and internship, you might not be a supervisee per se just yet, but consider how these strategies and ideas that we're hearing from others will help you in the future. And again, we want to pay attention to different wellness activities. So as we looked at those wellness models, what are areas that are focusing more on the physical self, the emotional self, the social self, the occupational self. So here we go.
So the first case we're going to focus on is the client. So the scenario would be a client came to virtual counseling with stress regarding civil unrest. So what would you do as a counselor? And I guess also naming a few wellness strategies that could be used by a counselor.
So this is really a two-parter. We want to know how we're helping our client to identify wellness, given that they're coming with a lot of stress, given current events. And we also want to know, how can we help ourselves stay well as a counselor working with this individual?
The first thing I would do is obviously validate what their experiences are and reflect on all of the once in a lifetime experiences we've all been experiencing over the last year. And this sounds like one of my clients actually. And so something that we spend time talking about is how much screen time and how much news they're absorbing, and trying to find the balance, obviously, of wanting to be informed of everything that's going on, but also the cost and the toll that it's taking on them and taking away from their ability to do the things that they need to do to keep themselves well.
Yeah, I love that. I like that you first kind of normalize the experience as well, especially because a lot of people are going through this, so they're really not alone. And then just going back to the strategies of boundaries, making sure that we're taking breaks from things. And I think somebody mentioned that might have been you, Candace, about screen breaks and how difficult it could be, but how necessary it is with wellness as well. So that was great. Thank you.
Any other ideas? Anyone else working with clients or thinking of working with clients and what you would potentially do?
And please feel free to use the chat here if that's easier for you guys as well, just to shoot out some bullet points as to what you might be doing as well.
Okay, well, we'll move on to some strategies or some suggestions that we've come up with based on what's in the literature. So for clients, there's a lot of support for doing different wellness assessments. So the wheel of wellness, what you see there in the right-hand corner is a blank wellness wheel. It's a little bit more simplistic. This is something that I would use maybe with younger kids. If you've seen how the model has evolved over time, that second model with the essential self, the coping self, is a little bit more difficult for them to understand. It's pretty abstract if you think about some of the areas. So there are examples there. So like sleep, emotional, nutrition, spiritual, those are filled in, but I typically use a blank one. So I really help the client formulate what are different areas of wellness in your life, and they can pick anything. So staying with my kid example, I would then have them, so if we focus on sleep, I would say, okay, well, you mentioned that sleep is important for your wellness, and we would do some psychoeducation around that because it is. So that's great that they were able to identify that. But then also using those lines, we can have them color in how important relative to the other wellness areas sleep is for them. So it's kind of like a creative, fun activity as well that they can visually see. Well, sleep is, the most important thing for me because I've noticed that when I don't sleep well, I'm more anxious. I'm getting in fights with my siblings or my parents. I'm not doing well in school. So they're saying, well, sleep is the most important thing for me right now. So I would make sure that they pick a color and they color as far up the wellness wheel that they think. And we, of course, can say, you know, we can use numbering or percentages or different things like that. But with younger kids, we usually just color for that nice visual and then they can take it home. From there, we think of different strategies. So what could you potentially do knowing that sleep is so important for you? And what could you do to help improve sleep in terms of different strategies at home? So maybe we would talk about how the individual is using a lot of screens or watching TV up until bed, and that's waking them up and keeping them up and things like that. So we would come up with a plan of, okay, well, maybe we know that you want your TV time, you've earned that screen time. How about we try, a half an hour, maybe an hour earlier? Is that something that would work? Or what would be something else that I realize you're looking for something to do before you go to sleep? What's something else that you could potentially do that's a little bit different and maybe more geared towards sleep? So Calm could be a pretty good app if they have a phone or an iPad where it is targeting sleep specifically. They could listen to a sleep story, and that would be something that would put them in a place to really focus on how they're doing, how they're feeling, and knowing that, okay, it's not a TV show that I'm watching, but this is something that is helping me fall asleep. So I touched on a couple of these things, but tracking tools, using support groups, maybe infusing some nature. When we look at tracking tools, there's different things like MyFitness, there's a fitnesspal.com, there's My Health. There's things out there if you're interested in, your nutrition or physical self that you can actually use to monitor progress over time. So there's some things that you can suggest with your clients and really walk them through. This is something a little bit different that you could potentially do to target this area of wellness after exploring them. And we do want to note that these can be adapted for telemental health platform use. So when you're doing the wellness assessment, share your screen or have your client, send the worksheet ahead of time and have your client share the screen and say, as homework, I had you fill out the wellness wheel, really exploring different dimensions of wellness. And what did you come up with? And then, that could be part one. Part two could really be sitting down and exploring the different strategies, what's worked and what's not worked. Because often clients get in that space of nothing helps me sleep. I've tried this, I've tried this, I've tried this. And it's like, well, it's great. It's great that you've tried all of these things, but what are other things that you could potentially try, and helping them brainstorm and generate those so that or find exceptions, maybe something they've said earlier of like, when I go hiking, I sleep really well the next day. So point that out, find those exceptions to what your client is saying. And if you see here, like the apps, you can certainly use YouTube. Someone said they use YouTube earlier. You can use YouTube with your clients to do different mindfulness activities, breathing activities. It's really helpful for psychoeducation. And of course, support groups, now more than ever, I've seen so many go online. So that could be another way of, when you're hearing, I'm missing that social piece, and you're seeing that clients are really coming to you because it's like, it's all you've got. Some of the older adults out there, they're in counseling and they're like, I just look forward to talking to you because I can't socialize with anyone else right now. So really thinking about what are other ways that you can get them engaged while keeping them safe, again, considering COVID times. So moving on to our next case.
Okay, so this one we're going to be focusing on the student and also the counselor educator. So our scenario here would be a student came to office hours with concerns regarding their health, such as COVID-19 and symptoms of that, and their grades as well. So what are some ideas that we could implement as a counselor educator? How could we approach this? And then again, the second part of what are some wellness strategies that could be included here?
I know you guys are thinking, but as a counselor educator, this has been, the last couple semesters have been quite a struggle for me, and then even colleagues that I've checked in with on how do we balance this. We want to support students. We know so much is going on in their own lives, if not their physical health, family members, but then they're also really worried about their grades and what do I prioritize right now, my health or my grades, because I'm worried about both. And so for the counselor educator, it's like, you know, our first and foremost responsibility is to, you know, make sure that we are supporting the students and that their well-being comes first. But then two, what does that do to our courses? What does that do for assignments that are, you know, 20% of their grade, and you know, they've been working on it all semester and it comes to the end of the semester and it's incomplete. It doesn't look like anyone's jumping in yet for suggestions, but as we move to the suggestion slide, please feel free to. So some case suggestions. There was an article that I was a part of in 2018. So we actually looked at self-care and online programs. And what we found, our students said that responded to the survey, what they'd like to see from counselor educators is strong modeling of wellness in courses. So again, this could be very different depending on if you are an online program, an in-person program, a hybrid program. How do you model wellness in courses? So one thing that is a potential idea for an online course would be to use a course announcement, share something that you're doing as a counselor educator. So during COVID, while it's really, really difficult and you feel like you're locked into your house, you know, send a picture of you going for a walk and saying, you know, today I needed a break and this is the walk that I did and this is what I saw. Also, assignments to do self-care. They've mentioned wanting to be offered opportunities to practice. So what you see in front of you is a summer course that I taught and an assignment that I had. So they are creating a self-care plan. This class was geared towards working with the military. So I always, in my explanation for students, have them think about, okay, your professional counselor self-care plan. So what would be some struggles or some difficulties that perhaps you would have working with this unique group? So what would be a self-care plan that you have, and how would you create it specific to this group now that you know you've explored, you've processed some things that may come up for you that may be difficult for you with this group? Perhaps they also served and some things are triggering, or they were a spouse and so they understand the implications on family and that was, you know, upsetting to them because it's real for them right now. So that's just an idea of a potential thing that you could incorporate in your class to say, we are dedicating time to focus on self-care. It's an assignment. Also providing students with information about ethical practice. So if you don't engage in self-care and wellness, making sure that they're understanding that that then puts their clients at risk. That's client welfare there. If they're impaired in practice because they're burnout, they're experiencing vicarious trauma, countertransference is occurring in the therapeutic relationship, really having them explore why it's important ethically to be well when working with others. And then just like working with your client, creating a wellness plan, helping students identify a schedule and emphasizing, you should prioritize yourself. It also is a different way of allowing them to monitor effectiveness. So they have a wellness plan that they're working on. Each semester, they can think about what is working for them and maybe what needs to change. So practicum and internship came into their schedule, and they realized that they're not able to take lunch breaks like they used to. They can't do those mindful eating exercises or those walks during the day because now they've got a ton of other things to catch up on. So suggestions for counseling could be something depending on how much your student is struggling, but then too, considering different flexible deadlines. I know that's something that I've really started to do more given COVID, really asking the student, what do you need? How can I help you? Would allowing you a couple extra days be beneficial? Because then it shows that you're listening, you understand, you care.
I just want to say a quick thing here before we move forward, just coming from a student perspective here as well. So with the flexible deadlines, I think for students, because of our program always being online, there could be some resentment there that with COVID, we really didn't have any changes in our schedule. We just kind of kept moving forward as if nothing was happening, but everything else around everyone was falling apart. I mean, we had COVID, civil unrest, it was crazy. But even just speaking to some of my other peers, who have experienced issues with COVID or other personal issues that have impacted their ability to actually turn in assignments at the days they were due, and knowing that they felt a lot better that some of our professors have been able to really accommodate them and say, hey, listen, I understand, there's a lot going on. Again, normalizing that experience, but then allowing them to really take initiative in completing it by a day that still works best for them, but still allows them to complete the assignments. I think just in general with the self-care plan that's been implemented throughout the entirety of our program, I feel like there's been several courses that I'm very aware of self-care, and it's done in a very fun way as well. So like I had, for one instance, one of our courses, we had a discussion board over, and it's typically done over spring break, like we have a self-care week, and then we could share what some of our self-care strategies are. But it's cool to really see the other peers outside of the school setting and seeing pictures shared like, oh, I went on a walk with my dog and everyone can comment on that. Or, oh, I went and I did this cooking class and people can comment like, oh, where did you do the cooking class? That's really awesome. So it's a good way for us to really bond as a cohort and as peers, while also learning different self-care strategies as well, in addition to having the professors modeling this and really having it resonate that this is important, especially in this profession.
Thanks, Nikki, for adding that. So this is our last case.
Okay, so this is the supervisee case. And our case scenario here is going to be a supervisee came to supervision with signs of burnout. So what would you do as a supervisor in this case? And again, a few wellness strategies that could be used.
In my example, which I actually had I've had supervisees come to me with this, especially in the last year, we take a look together at their schedule and see certain clients that are scheduled back to back and whether or not that in and of itself could be an easy schedule change, or adding more breaks in between clients too. That way the counselor can go for a walk or have some lunch or, do what they need to do for a reset prior to continue their work for the rest of the day.
Yeah, I love that. Just having them reflect on some of their schedule difficulties and how they can be modified. I see something here about identifying triggers for their burnout. That's great as well. I mean, that's a whole preventative aspect of this at the same time, which is important.
Yeah, and maybe it is the clients that they're seeing back to back. Maybe you've got two really complex, heavy trauma cases, and just by switching for a couple hours in between, that would be something that would help. Or perhaps there's some stuff coming in from their personal lives that are spilling over into the workplace. So maybe it's reversed. We always think of work spilling into personal life, but maybe it's the personal stuff spilling into work. So really sitting down and identifying different triggers would be important. So some of the case suggestions that we've identified: maintaining a balance between professional and personal life, looking at different work rituals. So how to leave the space. That does go to what you said, Candace, about looking at scheduling to some extent. When can you turn off your computer? Can you set timers for how much time you're going to allot for notes, rather than taking, 3 hours at the end of the day because you need to get those notes done? Can you try to do 5 minutes here and there? Can you close the door? Perhaps you have people walking in and out, and that's a social thing that is beneficial to you, but maybe it would be more beneficial to have your door closed so you're not overwhelmed by all the work that's piling up because of that. I do see that Michelle, you noted that burnout skills and supervision as a baseline for them. That's excellent. I've never done that, but a really, really good idea to start with that. Continue self-awareness. So that could be a tool you would use for self-awareness to say, okay, let's remember where you were in the beginning when we started, and now let's reassess based on the assessment. Finding ways that they can control their work environment. So I know for my supervisees, they always say, like, my schedule is set, there's not a lot I can do, but really saying, what do you have control over? And helping them move forward with, well, I could shift maybe my day on Monday, or maybe I pick up an hour and then I have a day off, because a day off is what I need to do my doctor's appointments and things like that. Also having them really reflect on positive experiences. So in supervision, not only allowing them the space to process, what do you need help with? What are some challenges? But starting with, what are positive things going on? Where are you in terms of, like, what's one positive experience you've had with this client? I know there's a lot of struggles, but what are some positive things you can identify, not only on the client's aspect and their role, but on your role as the counselor? Finding different leisure activities and breaks, consulting, having them consult maybe with other colleagues, individuals who are in their same situation. So as supervisors, it could be hard. It's hard to go back to that place where you've got classes, you've got family, you've got all of these things that you're balancing. Our roles are our lives are a little bit different. So maybe encouraging them to talk to other students in their program and identifying things that they're doing while things are difficult at this time. Different trainings, conferences, having them socialize, because you can be like sucked into clients, but making sure that they take the time to go out and just talk about how they're doing, meet with friends. Limiting caseloads and attending personal counseling sessions. So that would be something, if you see your supervisee really struggling, it's not necessarily your role as a supervisor to provide them counseling services, but supporting them and letting them know, it's great for you to go talk to someone and process this. It's important for counselors to have the experience of being in counseling. I see Jackie. I love that we're able to have this conversation. When I obtained my undergrad degree in 2006, self-care was rarely addressed. I think it's awesome, Candace and Kellie, how you're encouraging students to consider and implement self-care strategies so they're able to provide the best level of care to clients. Thank you, Jackie. I really appreciate that comment, and I'm sure that Candace, you do too, since you're focusing so much on it as well. Any other ideas when we're looking at supervisor roles? On the side there, you can see there's just a little bit of like a wellness tracker or planner. So individuals are tracking different things. You know, are you drinking water? Are you taking care of your basic needs? Are you getting exercise? So this is a really cool template that I actually pulled this off of Etsy. There's a lot of cool things out there that you could recommend students use to be more balanced. And I've heard a lot of students say that they love to have lists and things that they can like fill out and take with them. So this could be a really cool idea for them.
So I think here we just want to reflect on everything and just open up again another discussion about this. So based on what we've talked about today, what are some small changes that you may be planning on making in your life, considering all the roles here?
I know for me, I'm going to steal Michelle's idea and consider using an assessment type of tool at the beginning of working with supervisees. See self-awareness, thinking of positive moments at work.
I feel personally for myself that self-awareness has been very critical in helping me maintain self-care, just because if I'm not exactly sure of how I'm actually feeling, I may not feel the need to actually implement any form of self-care. And I guess with relation to, I mean, I'm not at this point yet, but I love that burnout scale of having a baseline for eventually understanding what my starting point is and then where I'm at moving forward. So I could even implement this just as going into the field as a starter, doing it myself of, okay, this is where I'm starting. And if I'm starting to feel a little bit stressed out, what am I feeling like now on a scale of 1 to 10 or whatever that rating scale is that I'm using for myself. So certainly different ways that we could change them to make them applicable to ourselves.
Yeah, and I think for me, I don't always realize it, but consulting with other counselor educators or other supervisors and processing with them about how supervisees are doing, students are doing, because it's a different perspective and they're able to point out, well, it sounds like maybe you're stressed right now. And, you know, that's why you're seeing things this way. Or, you know, it's a different level, not only of self-awareness, but having someone there to support you and give you some feedback or different perspective on how you're doing, checking in with you, you know, wow, it's awful to hear about all of these things going on with your students, but didn't you say that there was a lot going on in your own life? Like, how are you doing? What are you doing to make sure that, you know, you're not over accommodating students and burning yourself out? That's just one example I can think of that I didn't, at least before COVID, I value so much more reaching out and the perspectives of others to help me because things have changed and it's hard for me to keep up with the demands of students. Michelle, thanks for sharing the inventory that you use. Is that one free?
Yes, it's free.
Great. Because that's always another struggle too, of finding good stuff that's free. Any other techniques that we talked about today that you feel are most helpful? I mean, even if you want to share things that you've tried that weren't helpful and how you would adapted to make them helpful.
So just to add on to like identifying your burnout triggers, I also talk about identifying what your crispy triggers are or what your crispy tells are. So like maybe you're not fully at burnout, but you might start to notice that you're more irritable or aren't as present in session or something like that, or maybe are more distracted or it's taking you 25 minutes to write a progress note that typically would take you 5. Like just starting to recognize those are probably where I need to start moving my body more, getting a drink of water or petting my dog, or like easy things that I can do in between that, you know, can be more grounding as opposed to only implementing those things when I'm at the cusp of burnout, just because, you know, it'll be much more effective over time if I'm catching them that much sooner than when I'm in crisis mode.
Yes.
I love that, Candace. I was laughing to myself that it was called the Crispies. I was like, oh, that's really clever. Now, is that something that you've developed yourself, or is that something that you found somewhere and you've kind of just adapted it for use for yourself and your?
So that's something that I talked about actually, you know, my beginnings in this field. I'm in private practice now, but we're working in community mental health with very high risk population and doing crisis work. And so first recognizing it within supervisees, but then noticing that I'm also not above that and the ability to start to recognize that within myself. And so that's something that I'm always cognizant of, and especially in the last year, obviously identifying more crispy great or crispy activities that, you know, or behaviors that I might be engaging in to try to nip it in the bud before it gets to the point of burnout.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's a great way to implement prevention right there.
Nikole, this is Danita.
Hi,
If
Danita.
it's okay with you, can I put the polling questions up so I can make sure that participants have enough time to answer them as they relate to your presentation?
Sure.
Yeah. So our last slide was just questions, comments, concerns.
Yeah.
Perfect timing. Do you need me to stop sharing?
No, you don't necessarily have to. If there's
Okay.
questions, they can always do that while they're looking at the poll.
Okay.
Thank you. While you guys are pulling, are there any other questions, comments, concerns, ideas about how we bring more wellness into our field?
Hi, this is Jackie. So I can share a little bit. I love Candace's term crispy. I think you should patent that, Candace. But just on my own experience, I had mentioned before that I was in the profession for a really long time and then got out because I was burned out. And so I think I recognize now the importance of carefully choosing supervisors and organizations, because not all of them are on the same page as far as supporting self-care. And so that's going to be, that's been one of the things that I recognize that I need to do for myself.
Yeah, that's great, looking for that fit, because when we're talking about things like schedule adjustments, limiting caseloads, not every place is going to let you do that. And not every place is going to have, you know, mindfulness or Wellness Wednesday. So if that's something that you need and is important to you, really seeking out, like you said, different supervisors and organizations that are going to be more open to those things.
Jackie, I want to say thank you for sharing that too, because as somebody who's new to this field, I feel like I only know self-care as being completely integrated in counseling because of the program that I've come from. So I think it's interesting to see the opposing viewpoint too, as to how the field has changed over time, and hopefully how it continues to progress over time and really evolve with regard to implementing self-care with the counseling profession. I'm hopeful that moving forward, it will be something that is more talked about than it even is currently. But it's interesting too, because we actually had a discussion about this in one of my classes last night with regard to setting boundaries and saying no to things. And when at the initial onset of accepting a job and saying, this is what I need, and I need to have some forms of self-care. I need some support with regard to self-care. Just setting boundaries from the get-go of, this is what I need. Even though I'm new to the field, I recognize the importance of that. So I think it's kind of cool to see the connection there. And again, I appreciate you sharing your personal story about it.
I want to be mindful of time. It looks like we have about 4 minutes. Anything else? Any other comments? Well, we thank you so much for attending. We really enjoyed learning from you and talking about wellness. That's the first step, right? If we talk about it and we think about it, then we're more likely to do it. I know wellness, sometimes I ignore it or I don't think about it to avoid it. And so that's why it's, when we present on topics like this, it always gets me back into that self-reflection, self-awareness that we've been talking about today. How well am I? What am I doing for wellness? How do I know that I'm well or unwell? What is my body telling me? Am I sleeping? Am I eating? Am I exercising? So we do hope that you've learned some things that you can take to the various roles that you have. And we encourage you to reflect on how well you are today.